There are wounds that only heal when we find the courage not to retaliate with hate, but with a new beginning. This is the story of a man who, on the day he was supposed to get married, had his heart shattered. And of the quiet woman who taught him without words that true love doesn't need to be shouted to be real. Subscribe to the channel for heartwarming stories every day. The morning arrived with a low-lying fog, the kind that clung to your skin and made the world feel smaller, more contained. Miguel woke before the sun, as always. The ranch didn't wait. It didn't matter if it was Monday or Sunday, if it was raining or cold, the land demanded presence. He pulled on his sturdy work pants, his usual light-colored shirt, and headed to the barn. The cows greeted him with their routine mooing, and he filled the troughs with fresh hay, smelling the damp earth rising on the breeze. Everything was as it should be, everything except him, because this was no ordinary day. At noon, Miguel was to be married. The ceremony would be simple at the little church in town, with wildflowers and bread baked by the neighbor. He had waited for this with a patience that bordered on devotion. Waited for her, for the promise of no longer being alone, of having someone to share the burden of cold mornings and the silence of long nights. He went back inside and stood before the smudged mirror in the living room. The dark suit hung on the chair, freshly pressed. The tie, a subtle shade of green chosen by her. The simple silver ring rested on the dresser beside the Bible that had belonged to his mother. Miguel took a deep breath. He tried to feel joy, but what came was just a tightness in his chest, something akin to fear or dread. He shook his head, pushing the thought away. Groom's nerves, nothing more. At 10 in the morning, after watering the horses and checking the fence gate, he decided to walk to the old barn. It had been his refuge since he was a boy. When his father died, it was there he cried for the first time. When the harvest failed 2 years in a row, it was there he asked God for strength to continue. The smell of old wood and dry hay always soothed him, as if the place held all the unspoken prayers. He pushed open the heavy door, and the morning light streamed in golden shafts, illuminating the dust motes in the air. And then he saw. She was there, the white dress, immaculate, gleaming in the contrast of the dim light. Her hair unbound, the bouquet dropped on the floor. And in her arms, with an intimacy that left no doubt, was David, his best friend since childhood, the man who had helped build the new fence, who had slept in his house more times than he could count, who had promised to stand by his side at the altar. The kiss they exchanged was not shy. It was deep, urgent, full of everything Miguel had never received from her. A kiss that carried truth, but not for him. Miguel didn't move. He didn't shout. He didn't clench his fists. He just stood there, frozen, as if his body had turned to stone. They took a few seconds to notice him. When they finally broke apart, breathless, and looked toward the door, they saw a man standing there, his face expressionless, his eyes empty. "Miguel," she whispered, panic in her voice. He didn't answer. David took a step forward, his hand still on her shoulder, as if wanting to protect her from something. But from what? From the man who had never raised his voice, who had never hurt anyone. "I can explain," she tried, but her voice faltered. "You don't have to," Miguel said, and the calmness in his tone was more frightening than any shout. He looked at her one last time, not with anger, not with contempt, just with a sadness so profound it seemed to suck all the light from the barn. Then he turned and walked out. The sound of his steps on the packed earth was the only noise for a long time. Behind him, the silence of the countryside seemed to mock the naivety he had carried for so long. And it was there, amidst the hay and suspended dust, that something inside Miguel finally broke, but not into anger, into lucidity. Miguel walked aimlessly for almost an hour. He passed the dirt road, the wooden bridge that creaked under the weight of those who crossed it, the creek where he used to fish as a boy. His leather shoes got muddy, but he didn't care. He didn't know where he was going. He only knew he couldn't go back home, Not yet, not with the wedding suit waiting, not with the ring on the dresser, not with the memory of that kiss burning in his eyes. Gradually, his steps led him to town. The streets were empty. It was Saturday morning and most people were preparing for the party that would happen in the afternoon, the party that would no longer be. He stopped in front of the only house with a light on at that hour, Helena's house, the seamstress. He didn't know why he was there, perhaps because she was one of the few people in town who didn't ask too many questions, perhaps because, deep down, he knew he needed help, and not the kind a priest or a friend could offer. He needed something simpler, more human. He knocked on the door. She took a few seconds to open it, and when she did, her eyes widened when she saw him there, still dressed in his wedding attire, his face etched with an exhaustion that seemed years old. "Miguel?" Helena gripped the doorknob tighter, as if needing support. What happened? Wasn't the wedding at noon?" He swallowed hard. "There won't be a wedding." She fell silent, processing. She didn't ask any more questions. She simply stepped aside and opened the door. "Come in." The house was small but cozy. It smelled of clean fabric and fresh bread. A low lamp burned on the work table where piles of fabric scraps waited for stitches. In the corner, an old armchair covered by a crocheted blanket. Everything there breathed care, patience, contained life. Helena closed the door and pointed to the chair by the fireplace. "Sit, I'll make some tea." Miguel obeyed. He sat down slowly, as if his body weighed more than ever. His calloused hands rested on his knees, and he stared at the low fire burning in the hearth. Helena returned with 2 mugs. She placed one in front of him and sat in the opposite chair, holding her own mug between her hands as if seeking warmth. She said nothing. She just waited. And it was that silence without judgment, without morbid curiosity, without haste, that finally made Miguel break down. "I saw her," he said, his voice hoarse. "With him, in the barn." She was with him." Helena closed her eyes for an instant, not in surprise but in understanding, as if she had seen that kind of pain before, perhaps in her own life. "I'm so sorry," she said, and there was absolute honesty in her voice. Miguel shook his head, still looking at the fire. "I don't know what to do now." Helena took a sip of her tea. Then, with a calm that only comes from someone who has weathered storms, she said, "Now you breathe." Then, almost without thinking, he unbuttoned his suit vest. The last button, the one in the back, was stuck. He tried to reach it, but the seam was too tight. "Let me see," Helena said, standing up. She moved closer, and with nimble fingers, she undid the knot holding the fabric. The gesture was simple, almost domestic, but there was something in it, a tenderness, a care, that made Miguel's chest tighten in a different way. When she finished, she stepped back and their eyes met for a second. "There," she said softly. "Thank you," he replied. And for the first time that day, Miguel felt he might be able to breathe again. Miguel left Helena's house not quite knowing what to feel. There was something strange about the encounter, not bad, just unexpected. As if, for the first time in years, someone had looked at him without expecting anything in return. He returned to the farm at dusk. The sky was tinged with orange and purple, the heavy clouds heralding rain. He secured the animals, covered the firewood, closed the windows, all on autopilot. When he finally entered the house, he took off his suit and hung it in the corner of the closet, as if it were just another piece of clothing. But it wasn't. That night, Miguel didn't sleep. He sat on the porch, staring into nothing, listening to the wind rustling through the pines. He thought of David. He thought of her. He thought of all the times he had trusted, had believed, had given his heart without fear, and he felt ashamed, not of them, of himself, for being naive, for not seeing, for believing that love was enough. In town, the news spread like wildfire. On Sunday morning at Mass, eyes turned to the empty pew where Miguel always sat. The ladies whispered behind their fans. The men exchanged heavy glances. The bride hadn't shown up. David hadn't either. And when Helena walked into church in her usual simple dress and shawl over her shoulders, she felt the weight of eyes upon her. "They say he went to her house yesterday," murmured Mrs. Irene to her friend. "The day he was supposed to get married." "You don't say." "I saw it with my own eyes. He went in, suit and all." Helena pretended not to hear. She sat in the back pew, opened her missal, and prayed in silence. But she knew this wouldn't go unnoticed. It never did. After Mass, as she was leaving, she was approached by Mrs. Aparecida, the blacksmith's wife. "Helena, dear." Her voice was too sweet to be sincere. "People are talking. You had Miguel over yesterday, didn't you?" Helena stopped. She looked at the woman with a disarming calm. "I did. He needed some help." "Help?" Mrs. Aparecida raised an eyebrow. "On his wedding day?" "The wedding didn't happen." "Well, yes. And he shows up at your door." Helena sighed. "If there's something you want to say, Mrs. Aparecida, just say it." The woman stepped back a little but insisted. "I just think appearances matter, Helena. You know how people talk." "I do, and I don't care." She turned her back and walked away, ignoring the whispers that followed. That afternoon, Miguel returned to Helena's house. He didn't know why. Perhaps because it was the only place where he didn't feel the weight of judgment. Perhaps because he needed to truly thank her. He knocked on the door, and she opened it with an expression of surprise. "Miguel, I just came to thank you," he said, his voice low. "For yesterday." Helena glanced around, saw the empty street, and motioned for him to come in. "Come in, quickly, before someone sees and invents more stories." He entered. She closed the door and crossed her arms, leaning against the wall. "People are already talking," she said, without preamble. Miguel frowned. "Talking about what?" "That you were here, that I let you in, that—" He understood before she finished. "That there's something between us." Helena nodded. Miguel took a deep breath. "I'm sorry. It wasn't my intention to put you in this situation." "It wasn't you. It was the world." She gave a tired smile. "It always is." He fell silent. Then carefully he said, "If you want me to not come back anymore—" "No," Helena interrupted him too quickly. Then softer, "No, you can come. It's just, maybe it's better not to come during the day." Miguel looked at her, and something passed between them. Something neither of them could name yet. "All right," he said. She nodded, and for the first time, they both smiled. Miguel began going to Helena's house at dusk when the town was quieter. He didn't make a show of it. He'd knock on the back door where the yard led to a narrow alley, and she'd let him in without questions. At first, he just sat and stayed there. Helena would sew, he would watch the fire. Few words were exchanged, but the silence between them wasn't awkward. It was the kind of silence that welcomed. One night she asked, "Do you miss her?" Miguel took a moment to answer, "I miss who I thought she was." Helena stopped sewing and looked at him. "I understand." And he knew she truly understood, because Helena carried scars too. He had never asked, but he knew, from the way she spoke of the past, always in the past, never in the present. "And you," Miguel ventured, "do you miss anyone?" Helena turned her eyes back to the fabric in her hands. "I used to. Now I just miss who I was before I met that person." The words hung in the air, heavy and honest. Miguel leaned forward slightly. "Do you think we can go back to being who we were?" Helena shook her head slowly. "No. But we can become someone better." From time to time she'd give instructions. "Pull it more to the left. Now hold it steady." And he'd obey, focused, as if it were the most important thing in the world. When they finished, Helena folded the quilt and placed it on the armchair. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "I didn't do anything." "You did. You stayed." Miguel felt something warm spread through his chest. The next week, he brought firewood for her hearth. Helena protested, but he insisted. "You gave me tea." I'll give you firewood. We're even." "We're not," she replied, but she smiled. Little by little, the gestures multiplied. He fixed her back gate, which had been creaking. She sewed a patch onto his jacket, which was torn. He brought fresh eggs. She baked bread. There was nothing romantic about it, or at least neither of them dared to call it that. It was just care. The kind of care two hurting people offer each other without expecting anything in return. But the folks in town saw it differently. "He goes over there every week," commented the general store owner. "They say she sews for him now," added another. "Poor guy, he just got out of one and he's already mixed up with another." Miguel heard the comments but pretended he didn't. Helena did the same. They knew that if they paid attention, the weight of gossip would eventually crush whatever was growing between them. And something was growing. Slow, quiet, fragile, but real. The storm hit one Friday morning, with winds that moaned through the trees and rain that fell in heavy sheets. Miguel woke to the sound of something banging on the roof. A loose shingle, probably. He dressed quickly and went out to check on the animals. The barnyard was flooded. 2 cows mooed nervously, and he hurried to open the gate and guide them into the covered shed. The water was already rising to his ankles. The wind was tearing branches from the trees. That's when he saw the mare. She was down on the ground, her hind leg caught between loose planks of the fence. Her eyes were wide, her body trembling. "Easy, girl," Miguel murmured, kneeling beside her. He tried to free her leg gently, but the wood was dug in deep. The mare whinnied, trying to pull away, and he had to hold her firmly. "Easy, I'll get you out of there." It took nearly half an hour under the torrential rain before he managed to break the plank and free her leg. When he finally succeeded, he carried the mare into the stable and examined the wound. It was swollen but didn't look broken. He cleaned the cut, applied an herbal poultice he'd learned from his father, and bandaged it carefully. The mare gradually calmed down, and Miguel stayed there, sitting in the straw, stroking her neck as the rain hammered on the roof. That's when he realized he was soaked, shivering with cold, exhausted, and alone. The next day, Miguel showed up at Helena's house late at night. She opened the door, her eyes widening when she saw him. "Oh my God, what happened?" He was pale, his voice hoarse. "The mare, she got stuck. I managed to free her, but..." Helena pulled him inside. "You're freezing. Come on, sit here." She made him sit by the fireplace, took off his wet coat, and brought him a blanket. Then she returned with a mug of hot tea and a piece of bread. "Eat." Miguel obeyed. His hands trembled as he held the mug. Helena sat beside him and for the first time touched his face with the palm of her hand, checking his temperature. "You're running a fever." "I'll be fine." "No, you won't," she said, standing up. "You're staying here tonight." Miguel started to protest, but she cut him off. "Don't argue. You can barely stand." He sighed and let his head fall back, closing his eyes. Helena prepared the armchair with blankets and pillows and helped him lie down. He fell asleep almost immediately. She stayed there, sitting in the chair beside him, watching over him. Every now and then, she'd place her hand on his forehead, check his breathing. And she realized that, for the first time in years, she didn't feel alone. Miguel woke to the sun already high in the sky. His head still felt heavy, but the fever had broken. He sat up slowly and saw Helena in the kitchen, making coffee. "Morning," she said, without looking back. "Morning," he replied, rubbing his face. "Sorry about..." "Don't be sorry." She brought him a mug of coffee and sat at the table. He joined her. They sat in silence for a while. Then Miguel said, "Thank you for taking care of me." Helena smiled faintly. "You've been taking care of me too, just in a different way." Miguel looked at her, and something tightened in his chest. It wasn't passion, not yet. It was something deeper. Recognition, belonging. "Helena," he started but stopped. "Go on. I don't want you to think I'm here because she left me." Helena lowered her eyes. "And you're not?" No, his voice was firm. I'm here because here I can breathe. Because you look at me like I'm me. Not the rancher, not the jilted fiancé, just me. Helena's eyes welled up, but she didn't let the tears fall. Me too, she confessed. I feel that way too when you're here. They looked at each other, and for the first time, neither of them was afraid to admit what was happening. But the world offers no respite to those who seek peace. The next morning, as Helena opened the window, she saw Mrs. Aparecida standing on the street, looking directly at her house. And she knew the storm wasn't over yet. Word that Miguel had spent the night at Helena's house spread through the town like wildfire. The following Sunday, church was more crowded than usual. Not out of devotion, but out of curiosity. Helena entered the church and felt the weight of every stare. She walked to her usual pew at the back and knelt to pray, but the words wouldn't come. Only the feeling of being judged for something she hadn't done. Miguel entered shortly after. He felt the stares too. But unlike Helena, he didn't lower his head. He walked to the pew beside hers and sat down. The murmur was immediate. Mrs. Aparecida, sitting 2 rows ahead, turned and shot him a look of disapproval. The blacksmith whispered something to his wife. Even the priest, as he ascended the altar, seemed to hesitate before beginning his sermon. After the service, as they were leaving, they were approached by a small group led by Mrs. Irene. "Miguel," she began, her voice laced with false concern. "We're worried about you." "Worried?" he repeated, his voice calm. "Yes. You've just come out of a difficult situation, and already you're being seen with someone else." Miguel crossed his arms. "And that's whose business is it?" Mrs. Irene blinked, surprised by his frankness. "Well, Miguel, we only want what's best for you. And for Helena too, poor thing. People are talking. Let them talk," Helena said, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. All heads turned to her. "Helena, dear," Mrs. Aparecida interjected. "You know how it is. You're a single woman, he's a single man. Appearances matter." "Appearances," Helena repeated slowly. "You worry so much about appearances that you forget to see what's true." "True?" Mrs. Irene raised an eyebrow. "And what is true then?" Helena took a deep breath. "That he's a good man, that I'm an honest woman, and that we don't owe anyone an explanation." The silence was heavy. Miguel placed his hand on Helena's shoulder, a subtle but firm gesture. "Let's go," he said, and they walked away. But as they walked down the dirt road, Helena felt the weight of the entire town on her shoulders. And she knew this was far from over. That night, Miguel didn't go to Helena's house. He stayed at the ranch, sitting on the porch, looking at the starry sky. He thought about everything that had happened. He thought about how his life had been turned upside down in a few weeks, and he realized he couldn't keep leaving Helena alone in this battle. The next day, he went into town and sought out Father Anselmo. The priest was an old man, with white hair and tired but kind eyes. He received Miguel in his small house next to the church. "Miguel, my son," the priest gestured for him to sit. "What brings you here?" Miguel took a deep breath. "Father, I need some advice, or perhaps a blessing." The priest tilted his head. "Speak. I want to ask Helena to marry me." The priest was silent for a moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. "Are you sure about this, Miguel? It hasn't been long since—" "I know," Miguel interrupted. "I know what people will say, but I also know what I feel, and I know who she is, and I know that if I let fear guide me, I'll lose the only good thing that's happened in my life since that day." The priest smiled faintly. "Then you already know what to do." Miguel nodded. "But I need to do it the right way. I don't want her to go through any more shame because of me." The priest placed his hand on his shoulder. "Then marry her, in the church, in front of everyone. Show the town that what you have is true." Miguel looked up. "And if they don't accept it?" "They don't have to accept it, they just have to respect it." Miguel, what? Marry me. Helena's eyes widened. What? Marry me, he repeated, his voice firm. Not because I need to prove something to anyone, but because I want to. Because you're the person I want to share my life with. Because I can't imagine a day without you anymore. Helena was speechless. Tears came fast and silent. Miguel, I don't know what to say. Say yes. She sobbed, laughing and crying at the same time. Yes. He stepped forward and hugged her. And for the first time, they both allowed themselves to believe that maybe, just maybe, true love was still possible. The wedding was set for 3 weeks later. No fanfare, no big party. Just the ceremony at the church, followed by a simple lunch at Miguel's ranch. Helena sewed her own dress, simple, white, but beautiful. Miguel wore the same suit he would have worn for the previous wedding, but this time without the weight. This time with hope. On the day, the church was full, not just with the curious, but also with people who, over the weeks, had begun to see the truth. Mrs. Gable, the neighbor who always brought eggs, was there. The blacksmith and his wife, too. Even Mrs. Peterson, who had gossiped so much, showed up at the back, silent. When Helena walked down the aisle alone, Miguel felt his chest tighten. She was beautiful, not because of her dress, but because of the sparkle in her eyes, the shy smile, the courage to be there. Father Michael conducted the ceremony with serenity, and when it was time for the vows, Miguel took Helena's hands and said, I promise to respect you, to take care of you, to listen to you, and to never, ever make you doubt how important you are to me. Helena smiled, tears streaming down her face. And I promise to give you what you've deserved all along, a real home. They kissed under the discreet applause of the town. And as they walked out of the church, hand in hand, the sun shone brightly in the sky. 6 months later, the ranch was unrecognizable. Helena had planted flowers around the house. The fence was repaired. The vegetable garden was lush and green. And inside the house, the smell of fresh bread filled the rooms every morning. Miguel woke up early, as always, but now he didn't feel the weight of loneliness. Because beside him, in the simple queen-sized bed, was Helena. And as he woke her with a kiss on her shoulder, he heard her soft sigh, still smiling in her sleep. They had coffee together. They talked about their day. They planned their future. And at night, they sat on the porch, side by side, watching the stars. The town had gotten used to it. Some still talked, but most had accepted it, because it was impossible to deny. Those two truly loved each other. One afternoon, as Helena was sewing in the living room and Miguel was reading by the fireplace, she stopped and looked at him. Are you happy? She asked. Miguel looked up from his book and smiled. More than I ever thought possible. She smiled back. Me too. He closed the book and went to her. He knelt beside her chair and took her hands. Thank you, he said. For what? For staying, for believing, for teaching me that starting over isn't giving up. It's having courage, Helena caressed his face, and you taught me that true love doesn't need to be shouted to be real. They hugged, and there, in that simple house, in that ordinary life, they found what so many search for and few find, a real home. Because in the end, the sweetest revenge wasn't destroying those who hurt them. It was building, together, a life worth living. If this story touched you, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to receive new stories every day. What would you do in their place? Comment and share with someone special.